Hello, welcome to Corporate Compliance Training. I am Rebecca Ziobrowski. I am the Director of Quality Assurance and the Corporate Compliance Officer for Lifetime Assistance. Remember my name. You may need to use it in the future. Should someone ask you who the compliance officer is, just say Rebecca Z. You don't have to know the Ziobrowski because it's a ridiculous last name, so Rebecca Z is fine. Should you ever have compliance concerns or need to reach me, I am always available. Let me know if you ever need anything. Today with me is Melissa Zambri. She's an attorney from Barclay Damon, and she has been with the agency for many years. She helps us with all things compliance and confidentiality, HIPAA, and all things related. So she's going to talk to you today about compliance and what that means to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to talk about compliance. Welcome to Lifetime Assistance. The first thing that I'll say to you is you are now working at an agency that tries very, very hard to do things the right way. And we try very hard to do things the right way the first time, but when we don't, we make a mistake, we try to go back and fix it and try to find ways so that it doesn't happen again. It's extraordinarily important to us to follow all of the laws and the rules and the regulations that apply to the agency. And for those of you who have come from another agency, we may do things a little bit different here, and that's fine. For those of you who have not been in this field before, one of the things you're going to learn very quickly is that there are a number of rules and requirements that we're required to follow, and it can be very difficult sometimes to figure out how all of those blend together. So the most important takeaway from today is if you have a question about anything that you're asked to do on behalf of the agency, and you're uncertain about something that you've been asked to do or how we're doing something, ask. That's the most important thing, is that you take the time to ask questions. There are a number of resources available to you, including your supervisor, including Rebecca, including people on other staffs, directors. People are available to you to get those questions answered. You should never, ever hesitate to ask. So what's a corporate compliance program? It's a system of internal controls, and we have it so that we're trying to do things the right way, follow all of the applicable laws and regulations, and do all of those types of things. We're also trying to make sure that our quality assurance functions and the controls in our business office, our billing for services, all of those things line up. And we have the program in place also so that we can find out information, because it's extremely important that everybody understands what the rules are that apply to the agency and that we're all rowing in the same direction when we think about those. So we're here to educate people, obviously, as to their responsibilities. We don't want anyone to unintentionally violate a law. We don't want anyone to intentionally violate a law either. But we're also trying to create an ability to identify problems in advance. We want to know if we do something wrong. We would prefer to know it ourselves rather than have an outside regulator or an investigator find it, because we would like to do what we have to do, and we'll talk about some of those things today, including paying back money sometimes that we've billed for. We want to do what we have to do the right thing. We have a responsibility to report. We're paid for our services a number of ways, but the bulk of our revenue comes from the New York State Medicaid program. Other revenue streams as well, but the bulk of it from Medicaid. And we are required to disclose information and pay back funds when we have errors in billing that require it. Now, does that mean every mistake in documentation leads to a payback? No, absolutely not. So you should feel very, very comfortable coming to us if you feel like you've made a mistake or if you feel like your documentation isn't appropriate or you've done something late. Absolutely tell us about that. But there are times when we do return money because we've billed for something and then we later determine that we should not have billed for it. And that is our responsibility. So, you know, what's the good news? I mean, we're trying to get a mechanism so that we do things the right way. We're trying to get a mechanism so that you feel like you can get your questions answered. And that's what our corporate compliance program does. So if you have concerns, we want you to raise them. We're trying to do it right. That's a phrase that we've been using for a number of years. We've always been using it. We'll show you the doing it right form. But we all have a role in making sure that the organization is moving in a good direction, an ethical direction. And here at Lifetime Assistance, we take it very, very seriously. So there are regulations that require us to have a compliance program. We are also required to certify that we have an effective program. What's the difference between an effective program and maybe a not so effective program? An effective program is a program where you actually use it. You actually do what you say you're going to do in your policies and procedures. If you say you're going to audit, you audit. If you say you're going to investigate, you investigate. If you allow people the chance to report, they're able to report. It's not just a paper plan, something that we put up on the shelf or we put up on the intranet so that, people say, oh yes, we have a compliance program. We actually use it, and here we use it for all it's worth. We absolutely positively use it. So the plan itself, what do you need to know about the plan itself? The plan has a plan and policies and procedures. I would encourage you to read the plan, all right? It was enacted long before we were required. So I've noted that New York State requires many providers to have a plan. We actually had a plan before we were required to do that. We update it with new information as it's needed, and we're promoting the prevention, the detection, the resolution of compliance issues. That's the ultimate goal. There is a code of ethics and business conduct, and those are standards that we require all of our employees to follow. Some of them have to do with compliance and billing and some of the things that we talked about. Some of them have to do with broader issues. And so we have that in place, and it's distributed to you, and I encourage that you read that code of ethics and that you become familiar with it, because it's an extremely important document, and it's really the baseline of all the standards that we set that we require all of our employees to follow, no matter what your role is at the agency. We have standards and procedures, and again, as I said, we have procedures that attach to our compliance plan. So when I talk about the standards of conduct, what am I talking about? Things related to abuse and neglect. And for those of you who are new to this industry, unfortunately, abuse and neglect can be a major part of some of the things that go on. And sometimes it's unintentional, sometimes we didn't mean to do it, but sometimes there are times that we have to report abuse and neglect, and you'll get a lot of information about your reporting requirements under Justice Center requirements and otherwise. Inappropriate financial transactions, I mentioned that we bill legitimately for services that we actually provided. It discusses intimidation, threats, sleeping on the job, the untimeliness of records, harassment for anyone who has a concern there, dangerous items that you're not allowed to bring to work, illegal substances. All of the things that you would expect are required in an organization of its employees who are all at the same time trying to do the right thing. We do not falsify documents. We'll talk about that more. The inappropriate use of agency property. I've told in a number of trainings here, I work in an office, and sometimes in September, a lot of the office supplies seem to disappear. I wonder where they go. I have a suspicion it might have to do with the start of school, those types of things. We'll talk more about confidentiality, following, obviously, the rules of the agency, ensuring that we don't infringe on clients' rights, which they have a number of rights that we take very, very seriously. We have a gift policy, a conflict of interest policy. We're not allowed to pay for referrals to the agency. So a number of things, very, very important that you read that, kind of digest it. You'll be asked to sign off on it. If you have any questions at all about it, you can ask your supervisor, you can ask Rebecca. Any of those things are ways to get answers. So you've met Rebecca now via video, and you'll probably meet her in person as well. Rebecca is the compliance officer, and she oversees the corporate compliance program. She oversees the implementation of it, the training that occurs, obviously this training, refresher training. The directors get a 2-hour training. The board of directors also gets a training. So all of those types of things. The compliance officer is appointed by the board. Very, very important that the board is involved in our compliance activities. They know about our compliance activities. They follow along with what we're doing. Rebecca has the opportunity to call me if there's a question and she thinks I can be helpful. She also has the opportunity to talk to other directors, other people in the organization, and the board. You see her phone number. There are other ways to report as well, which we'll talk about. So again, the importance here is that any question is a good question. There are no silly questions. So if you have a question about something that's going on, please, please, please absolutely ask us. There is a compliance committee, and that's a group of people in leadership positions, such as the directors, that meets quarterly. Rebecca chairs that group, and there's board representation on it. And they review risk areas. You know, did something change in part of our programs where we bill differently? Or are we struggling in a particular area of compliance? Are there things we could do better with privacy or security? And they receive reports on investigations and audits, and then tries to kind of steer the agency towards doing things better, because that's what we're always trying to do. We're trying to do things better. We check your background, obviously. Congratulations if you're still here. We check your background to make sure that you have the appropriate credentials. We also make sure that you're not excluded. And you can be actually excluded, or kind of thrown out, if you will, of being able to provide services in the Medicaid and the Medicare programs. And if you are on that list, you are not allowed to provide services at our agency because you can't be paid with Medicaid money. You also can't provide direct services. So anyone who is excluded, and there are people who are excluded for things that happened at prior jobs, anyone who is excluded is not allowed to work here, and we check that list monthly to ensure that everybody is clear. I mentioned training. Everybody gets training. There is a post-test that you'll be taking with this. Try not to make it very hard, but there is that available to make sure that people indeed watched it. We'll provide retraining if there are updates. There's an annual update. New employees obviously get this training. You'll get site-specific training, whether you're in DayHab or ResHab or some other service. So very important to follow those rules that impact your job. We'll talk more about confidentiality. It's very, very important at the agency. It's in the compliance program. And then auditing and monitoring. So we do periodic audits of each program, meaning that we look at the documentation and we look at what we build and we make sure it's sufficient. So internally, we'll do that once a year in every program. Sometimes I come in and do external audits. And from that, we may review billings, we may interview people, we may ask questions, we may do a bunch of things. We provide a report back to the program and they respond to that report. And obviously, if there's ever a visit or an audit or an investigation by someone outside the agency, somebody who doesn't work for the agency, then that's something you should call Rebecca about. So if you're providing services and it's the middle of the night and an investigator shows up, or a person who has a badge, or a person requesting records, absolutely those are the times that you need to call your supervisor. Supervisor will get Rebecca involved. We need to know that those things are happening so we can handle them all consistently. Obviously, there's violations of the plan if we don't bill correctly, if we don't document correctly. All of those things are opportunities for us to make errors. And we do a lot of documentation. And when you do a lot of documentation, you may be in a situation where there's the opportunity for mistake, because we're all people, and people make mistakes. So we don't want you to feel bad about that. We want you to try to do your best. And if you do make a mistake, we want you to tell us about it. We can try to do what we can to try to fix it. But our documentation is important. Obviously, maintaining the individuals we served rights is extremely important. Obviously, a failure to follow the plan. And nobody can retaliate against you or seek retribution against you for trying to make some claim under the plan or ask a question under the plan or raise some issue with how we're doing something. That is absolutely, positively not allowed at the agency. And if you ever feel that because you raised an issue that there's been some retaliation against you, you absolutely call Rebecca, because it's extremely important that that not happen. And we take that very seriously. When we do make a mistake, we'll have a corrective action plan. We'll have people respond to us in 1 month as to how we're going to do things a little bit better. We make sure those are carried out. There might be a follow-up review of your program. And as I said, sometimes we pay money back. That's not uncommon. It's not something we do all the time, but it's not uncommon. Sometimes there's a need to discipline people depending on if their intent and other things, training, retraining, revising policies and procedures. We've done all of those things, and it's extremely important that we follow all of those things. So you're required to report. If you are concerned, you have a compliance concern, you have any concern with any of the items in the code of conduct, you have a concern about how somebody's being treated, any of those types of things, you are required to report under the compliance program. And it's extremely important that you do that. If you hide things, we can't get better. If you don't tell us about things, we can't get better. We can't correct things, we can't pay money back. So you can report to a supervisor or the compliance officer. And you can do that in person, you can do that by phone, or you can do it anonymously. And I don't care how you do it as long as you do it. So you want it to be anonymous because you don't want your identity known, that's fine. Understand that if you do choose an anonymous method, we can't follow up with you because we don't know who you are. So we may do things and you may not find out about them. And that's okay, but just understand that if we knew who you were, we would probably follow up with you and tell you about the resolution or how we investigated it or some of the things we might have uncovered to give you some comfort that we responded. So there's anonymous reports on the Doing It Right form or through Red Flag. We'll talk more about that. I mentioned retaliation is not tolerated. A failure to report can lead to personal liability. Very rare that anything you would do leads to personal liability in your job. Really, it's when you do something willfully or fraudulently on purpose, right? Those are the times that people get personally in trouble. But if you make a mistake, that is not it's not something that one gets personally in trouble for on a legal basis. But, if you hide things, right, if bad things are happening, if there's abuse in the house or some of those other things and you don't tell us, that's going to not look well. So we really, really want you to report if you possibly can. This is the Doing It Right form, which you can access a number of ways. And you just fill it out and you send it in. You can write it in crayon. You can have your child write it in crayon if you're worried about us looking at your handwriting, which we are not going to do. You can write it with your left hand. You can do whatever you want. You can use an old typewriter. That might be interesting. You can do whatever you want and then send this in, and your concern will be investigated. There's no doubt about that. There's also Red Flag, and this is a website where you can go in and you can raise your concern, and it's on an anonymous basis, and at first blush, it does not go to someone at the agency. So the person who works for Red Flag handles it, and they take a look at it, and then we determine how it's going to be investigated. You can get a card. See, I have props. You can get a card, okay? The card has the reporting information on it. You can keep it at your desk, keep it in your wallet, keep it at home, whatever you want to do. In the event that you have a concern, you may also see posters about Red Flag around, and you should make sure that, and by the way, this person looks very concerned in the poster. You don't have to look that concerned if you have something. So make sure, but if you are concerned and you have that look on your face, then that's when we need to know things. So you can report any of these numbers of ways, and we encourage you to do that. Obviously, we only bill when we have appropriate documentation, and you're going to learn what the appropriate documentation is when you get site-specific training, depending on the program that you're in. But there's requirements that we have to follow, and if we don't bill correctly or our documentation is deficient in a way where we're unable to bill, we may make adjustments as required, and sometimes we actually tell the government the mistake we made. It's called a self-disclosure, and we explain to them that we owe them money back, and then we pay them back the money. Obviously, you're going to be expected to do some of this documentation, perhaps if it's part of your job function. And if it is part of your job function, we need it to be accurate, we need it to be complete, and we need it to be done in a contemporaneous manner. And when we say contemporaneous, what we mean is we're going to ask you to do your documentation as close in time as possible to when you provide the service. Why do we do that? One, it's required under the rules. Two, if I asked you what you ate for lunch today, assuming that it's after lunch, when you're watching this, you would probably remember. If I ask you what you ate for lunch a couple of days ago, you might be able to piece that together. If I ask you what you ate for lunch a week ago, you might struggle, unless you're the type of person like one of my partners who makes a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day and 2 chocolate chip cookies that he bakes on Sundays, which is a whole different issue. But if you're that type of person, then you probably remember. If you did something special last Tuesday because it was your birthday, you may remember. But short of that, you're struggling to remember what you got at Wegmans because there are so many options. So that's the type of thing that you really need to be careful about. We ask you to do your documentation as quickly as possible because the memory fades. And we don't always remember what we did because we do so many things in the course of a day. So we require you to do it on a timely basis, and we absolutely require that it be accurate, and it's going to be reviewed further as to what that exactly means. Now you see there that it says backdating and predating are not acceptable. Let me explain to you what that means. When you sign a document, you're asked for a date next to your signature. In precision care, it's going to date things for you, which is very, very helpful, okay? Because then we're always going to know when you're in and when you sign something, and you'll get more training if you're going to use precision care. But when we have a record and we need a signature on it, we need signature on anything at the agency, and it's got a date next to your signature, that date is the date that you sign the document. Not the date that you wish you signed the document, which might be 2 weeks ago. Maybe we forgot to sign something. Maybe we can't find the original. We wish it was signed earlier. That's not the date. Not the date that it should have been signed. Not the date at the top of the document. Not the date that started the plan. It's the date that you actually wrote your signature down. And that, if you actually backdate, particularly with an intention of fooling someone as to how, and when I say backdate, I mean put a date on it that's prior to today. If I signed it today, put a date on prior to today. If you do that, then what you have done is you've committed fraud. And fraud is very, very serious, and it's actually a crime. So, because you are misleading someone into thinking that you signed it earlier. It's not worth ever doing that. If somebody instructs you to do that, don't do it. Contact Rebecca. You also can't predate things. We don't date things before we actually do them, okay? We always put the date that we actually signed something, all right? And we always record what we did, not what we hope to do. We don't want to do that because life changes. We've all had lists, 10 things on a list, and we're going to do them all today. And then we get the end of the day, and we've done none of them. So we don't record things in advance of us doing them because you could have something happen at work and not get to that. So it's extremely important that you understand that you document what you did and that obviously it always is dated, the date of your signature. Documentation is the basis for which we're paid. It's the basis for the quality of the services we provide. It's extremely important to us for so many reasons. And we are trying to create the appropriate impression of this agency, which is we take it seriously and we do it well. And so if it's reviewed by an outside person, we want it to look well and reflect the agency, and we want to make sure that it's complete and it's timely and it's easy to review. The position of regulatory bodies, or Medicaid, if they come in and look at us, it's actually called the Office of the Medicaid Inspector General, OMIG, is that if there's not sufficient documentation, the service did not happen. And that's even true if everyone knows the service happened. If the individual served says it happened, the family says it happened, we say it happens, it doesn't matter. If you don't have contemporaneous documentation, it didn't happen, you didn't do it. So it's extremely important that the documentation is taken very seriously. The other thing that is addressed in our plan is the quality of our services, which is the hallmark of what we do and is so very, very important. We provide compassionate services of a high quality. We're proud of what we do at the agency, and we take that extraordinarily seriously. So while I'm always talking about, the documentation and those types of things, that's all very, very important to us. But that quality is just as, or more, I would say more important to us. So providing those services, and then when a service is completed, we want to make sure that we have the appropriate documentation that supports the quality of our services. No one should sign the name of another person on a document. You document what you did. You should not share your login or your password if you have that with someone. You should not allow them to document things that you did. You only document what you did. Even if you forget, wait. Call your supervisor, do it later. We don't want you to get into a situation where somebody's saying that you're trying to mislead someone by having someone else document what you did or you documenting what someone else did. So you document what you did. Your neighbors and friends who work at work will document what they did, and we should be fine if we follow that, because it's extraordinarily important that when they look at the documentation, they may check against records to make sure you were working that day. They may check with you about providing the service. So the records really have to reflect who actually provided the service. The other thing is you never document, obviously, something that you did not do. Even if you wish you did it, you should have did it, someone told you to do it, that's okay. If you didn't do it, it doesn't get documented, all right? Explain why. You could talk to your supervisor. It's okay. All right. So we have very high confidentiality and privacy requirements at the agency, extraordinarily high. And part of that is because of certain laws, and part of that is the information that we maintain is of a very sensitive nature, and it's very important to us that we keep it confidential. So it is the right thing to do. And obviously you have your own health information, and you don't want some of that health information to get out either. So we take this very seriously, and I'm going to tell you some pitfalls that have happened in recent years, because the hard part of keeping things confidential is sometimes we get sloppy. Why do we get sloppy? Because we are living in a fast-paced world. And we're trying to do a million different things at the same time, and we're trying to multitask all the time, and we're checking out at Wegmans, and we're answering a text, and our phone is ringing, and we're trying to pay with our credit card, and all of that makes us distracted. And we get distracted, and then we end up in a situation where sometimes we disclose information inappropriately. So what is HIPAA? You've heard it before. You've probably gone to your doctor's office. You've gotten what they call a Notice of Privacy Practices. What is it? It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's a big, large statute. You don't have to know that. But when you hear HIPAA, you probably think privacy. There's 3 laws under HIPAA. One of them talked about the exchange of information for billing. One of them deals with privacy. The other one deals with the security of information. And HIPAA applies to covered entities, and we are one. So lifetime assistance is covered under the rules, which means we have certain requirements that we have to follow in regards to the rules. So what are some of those? It restricts how we can use and disclose information, and that's, we know what those restrictions are. The hard part with the disclosure of information, so when I say use, what I'm talking about is how we use the information within lifetime assistance. When I talk about disclosure, I'm talking about disclosing it outside of the organization. The very hard part with privacy is once you disclose something inappropriately, you can't take it back. It's like the times that you've said something and you wish you could grab it out of the air and stick it back in your mouth. Same thing with confidentiality. Once the information's released, there's nothing we can do. We can try to mitigate the damage and do some things, but there's nothing we can really do. So with confidentiality, we have to try to do things right in the first instance. My daughter's musical theater person, they did Aladdin a number of years ago, and PHI is a little like the genie in the bottle. Keep the genie in the bottle. Once you let the genie out of the bottle, he's big and he's blue and he's loud, and you can't shove him back in the bottle. That's how we have to look at privacy. So we have to be mindful of it all the time, because it's really easy to make an easy mistake. We have to safeguard information. We have to protect it. We have to do certain things to make sure that we're doing reasonable things to protect the information. We have to do certain administrative measures, certain rights go to individuals, and we have to have a privacy officer, and the privacy officer is Rebecca. And so if you have a concern about privacy, it's the same thing as a compliance concern. You just go to Rebecca with that. Now, state laws and some federal laws are actually more strict than HIPAA. So if something is more strict than HIPAA, it actually stays in place. So there are special laws in New York for mental health information and HIV, and we are actually covered by the mental health law. So what does that mean? What that means is our information is actually subject to higher scrutiny. We protect it even more than we would just regular information. And you can understand why. But the other thing that it means is if I go to a hospital for services and you find out that I was at Rochester General, you don't really know anything about me from that. You just know I went to the hospital. I could have had blood drawn. I could have had a broken finger. I could have had any number of things. I could have had very serious surgery. There's a number of reasons that I could be at Rochester General. The issue is if somebody knows that someone receives services from Lifetime Assistance, they know something about their diagnosis. And so knowing that someone receives services here, so a list of people with Lifetime Assistance at the top, and maybe their addresses, or maybe even without their addresses, could be enough to be protected health information, because then you know something about the person's perhaps developmental disability, or at least that they have enough of one to receive services from you. So it's extremely important that we protect that information and that we not be sloppy with that information. And we'll talk about Facebook and some other things where people have gotten into some trouble because they just weren't thinking. They didn't mean to disclose information, but they just weren't thinking when they did it. So mental health, HIV, substance use records all receive additional protection under the rules. And you can understand because those are very sensitive issues. So protected health information, which I've said a couple of times, relates to diagnosis or care or payment. The privacy rules protect written information, oral information, and electronic information. The security rules only protect electronic information. Now, what does that mean? The privacy rules are there to protect actually what comes out of your mouth, not just paper, not just what's in the computer. And sometimes the stuff that comes out of our mouth is the hardest stuff to control. And if it's not you, you know people like that who, they just open their mouth and stuff flies out. So we have to be very mindful when we're talking to people, especially about work. And most of us like to talk about our jobs. But we cannot disclose confidential information, and it's extremely important that we not. The other thing is within the agency, you only get the minimum amount of information necessary for your job function. So if you don't need to know about an individual's care because they live at another house where you don't provide services, you don't get access to that. Now, if you provide services in 2 houses, we may give you access to the information in both of those houses, but you only get access to what you need for your job. And that's all the way up and down the organization. There's no need to look at information that you don't need to look at for your job. And we have to safeguard the information, and we'll talk about, what that means. So we have to have a privacy officer, which we do. We train. So thank you again for listening today. We have to have remedies for violations. You're required to report concerns about privacy, just like you're required to report concerns about compliance. We have a written policies and procedures. We maintain records, et cetera. And again, nobody can retaliate against you for raising a HIPAA concern. Individuals get certain rights. They actually have the opportunity to ask us, how did you release my information? To whom did you release my information? That's called an accounting of disclosures. They have access rights. Their rights are not unlimited, but they do have the right to access records, and that's always been the law in New York. I mentioned the Notice of Privacy Practices. Some of you have probably got those at your healthcare providers, or you've seen them on website. It explains how we use and disclose information and how they can complain if they have any concerns. Confidential communications means somebody can say, only call me on my cell phone, don't call me at home. Those types of things are actually things that have to be followed. And so if you ever get that type of request, it needs to be noted, you need to tell certain people about it, we need to record it. You can also say, I don't care, don't ever tell my mother, don't ever tell my brother. I don't want them to know these things. You can do that. If one of those people is their guardian, it gets much more confusing. So make sure that if you get that situation, you go to your supervisor and talk it out so that we can make sure we get those things right. You can request amendment to your medical records. I had I had a physician once when I was giving a presentation. I thought he was very brave. When I said that you could amend medical records, a lot of the doctors in the room got very mad. They thought, why should they be able to amend my medical record? It's my medical record. And then a doctor raised his hand and said, when he was a resident, a friend of his, I'm sure it was a friend of his, but when he was a resident, a friend of his had somebody come into the emergency room. And when they came into the emergency room, they complained of hearing voices in their head. So the young resident wrote down potential schizophrenia. Well, it turned out that the woman had a hearing aid and it was malfunctioning, and she was hearing echoing, not voices in her head. So if you leave that in the medical record, the potential schizophrenia, and it's a life insurance company or someone like that is reading the medical record, are they going to get far beyond schizophrenia? They may not, right? Especially if it's Friday at 4 o'clock, all right? They may just deny that application. So in those particular instances, to be very, very careful that we get the medical record right, so there is an opportunity to amend. Taking complaints, which we do, and Rebecca does, and we respond to those, and then personal representatives, such as someone's guardian, get the information that the person would get to make the decisions that they get to make under whatever representation that they have. If you have that situation, and go to your supervisor. Supervisor can come to Rebecca if there's any concerns. So business associates. For any of you who end up being involved in our scanning or our shredding business, which we have for lifetime assistance, they actually are a business associate of many covered entities. So we are a covered entity, and in other ways, we're a business associate. But a business associate is someone who takes a covered entity's information and uses it because the covered entity asked them to use it. Our law firm is a business associate when we look at protected health information. So we can only use the information to support the covered entity, not for our own purposes, and we have to safeguard it. And obviously, if we do something inappropriate with the information, then we would have to disclose that to our client. And similarly, if shredding or scanning was to do something inappropriate with the information, they might have to disclose it to their customer. So those things are very, very important to remember, that sometimes there are other people who receive the information legitimately, but they have to follow things as well. So you're required under the rule to have, certain security standards, and some of those are physical standards, and they're very important. People should not be wandering around our facilities. People should not be wandering in houses. People should not be wandering dayhab. If you don't know who someone is and they're wandering around or they look lost, ask. Ask. I tell this story all the time. When I was in law school, I actually worked at a hospital for a while, and my second day, I decided to go venture out and find the cafeteria by myself. That was a mistake. I'm a little directionally challenged, but it's a hospital and they can be confusing. So I went and tried to go to the cafeteria to get my lunch, and I ended up in the morgue. And what I very quickly realized was if you're in a suit or a white coat in a hospital, people let you go anywhere. So I walked right into the morgue, which, for those of you who want to lose weight, is an excellent diet plan, because I was not looking for lunch after that. I actually went back to my office and was trying to get that smell out of my nose for, I think, a week. But in those particular cases, I should not have been allowed to just walk in there. And obviously things have changed since HIPAA. That was actually pre-HIPAA. So, but people should not be wandering around. If a door is broken, tell us. If a lock is broken, tell us. There should be no propping doors. I had a mental health client once where the smokers used to prop the back door at 2 o'clock. Everyone knew that. An ex-employee who wanted to wreak some havoc snuck into the back door because they knew it was going to be open, because it always was, and went through records. So thinking about those things and how we can secure our, the facilities or our houses or whatever site you work at, those things are very important. If we do try to fix something, keep the maintenance records. Show that we tried to secure something. Those are very important. If you are someone who uses a computer, use either for precision care purposes or otherwise, secure that computer. What does that mean? It shouldn't be facing people so that they can see the screen and read what's on it. You should be mindful of what people are around you and what they can see. If you're going to leave the computer, it should log out. You should log out. The screen should go dark. Those types of things so that people can't look. I've said this, frequently. When you go up to a desk at your doctor's office, and there's either a sign-in sheet in front of you, or you can see the computer screen, you can't help but look. That's because we're curious people, right? We can't help but look. It's somewhat of a flaw, but it's not a flaw. It's extremely important to understand that's just the way we are. When you sign into a sign-in sheet, you always read up to see if there's anyone there you know. It's just something that people do. If the computer screen is facing you, everyone looks at it. So knowing those things about people becomes very important to trying to secure information. If we have information on PHI on a thumb drive, it should be encrypted. IT can help with that. If we have it on a laptop, it should be encrypted. IT can help with that. We also want to know where the information is. If you are bringing records from one place to another, make sure someone knows that. Make sure someone knows that. What if you win the lotto and you forget to tell us that you've brought the record somewhere and you decide that you need to go to Hawaii right now? We need to know that the records are somewhere else because we're going to be looking for them and they're very, very important to us. So we need to know where information is when it travels. Don't just dispose of information, all right? I've told this a number of times. There's probably no one that works at Lifetime Assistance who has not heard this story. But a few years ago, we had a very, very bad winter. We've had a lot of very bad winters. For those of you watching it in winter, I hope we're not having a bad winter. Today it is a beautiful May day outside. So we had a very bad winter, and every Sunday night, it was like Groundhog Day, my garbage would blow over because it goes out Monday morning, and my recycling would blow over. And every Monday morning, I would trek through the snow, and I would say some choice words probably, and I would put the garbage back up, and I would put the garbage back in. And I'd put all the recycling back in, and I'd go back into the house and hope that it was not going to happen again next week, and then it would. Well, apparently, must have been one of the times that the recycling blew over. Some of the things had blown into my neighbor's yard. It was very windy. And when spring came and the snow melted, she was cleaning up her yard, and she found some of the stuff that was in our recycling. And I had not used a shredder, and I had just ripped the appropriate number of times that I thought was necessary some documents that I should have shredded without a doubt, and she taped my paycheck stub back together. And she came over to our house, and she rang the doorbell, and I opened the door, and she held up the taped document, and she said, "You need a shredder." Now, that's extremely embarrassing for someone who does what I do for a living. I absolutely should have used a shredder. I don't know. We get very busy, so things seem burdensome. I'd have to go get the shredder, take it out, plug it in, and I didn't think it was a big deal. And I ripped it up, and I thought to myself, my goodness, I can't, so I was going to use that story forever, and I am going to use that story forever because people remember it. And I'm going to use it for two reasons. One, you need to put PHI, protected health information, in a shred bin that is secured, and it needs to be shredded and disposed of appropriately, because the second thing I want you to remember is somebody will tape your mail back together. There are people who will go through the garbage to try to figure out if there's anything interesting there, and they have the time to do it. So I warn everyone that it's really easy to just throw things in the garbage, but when we're talking about people's protected health information, we cannot do that. We absolutely cannot do that. So the other thing is computers, right? If we're going to delete stuff off computers, I am told things are never deleted from computers. That unless IT gets a hold of a computer and deletes it, there's always some backup to the backup to the backup. Now, the exception to that is when you're working on a document for 2 hours and you forget to save it and you lose it, and now no one can find it. But I'm told that there's memory. We've learned from people who have been fined by the Office of Civil Rights, who enforces HIPAA, that fax machines and copy machines have memory, and when you copy protected health information, it gets stored. So whenever we have, IT equipment that might have PHI on it, we need to not just dispose of that or reuse it. We have to make sure IT does that, because it has to be very, very clear that it's actually done. Good Morning America or the Today Show or one of those shows a couple of years ago did something where they bought used laptops from a pawn shop, and in all of the cases, the people thought that they had wiped it clean before they gave it to the pawn shop, and in every case, they went in and were able to find people's social security numbers and taxes, all types of things. So very important that you keep that in mind. Obviously, your username and your password is yours. You do not share it. We're going to ask you to change that password every so often. Please follow that. There's a reason for it. Passwords get stolen. All of my information on my eating history for the last 2 years was apparently stolen on myfitness.com. Whatever, I'm sure nobody's putting it to good use. But those things happen, and so we have to constantly be reminding ourselves of the importance of securing passwords. Putting your password on the computer is a bad idea. It's never to be done. Don't stick it on a Post-it note on the computer. That kind of defeats the purpose of having a password. Use automatic log off. Use encryption. When we email protected health information, if that ends up to be part of your job where you might have to email protected health information, we have an encryption system. IT can show you how to do that, show you how to encrypt it. That means when it goes through, the ether lines or it goes through to the next place, that means it is encrypted in a way that someone cannot steal the information while it's being sent. Very important that we do that. We have a system here to do that. Make sure you do that. We can audit your access to Precision Care and other databases. We know when you're in there. We know how long you're in there. So don't poke around and look at neighbors or friends or other people's information. It's really, 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 if it isn't necessary for your job, under minimum necessary, you don't get it. And we can keep track of that, and we do. We have to, if we breach, which means we do something that we're not supposed to do with somebody's protected health information, we actually have to notify the individual. And so that is usually not a great day for our privacy officer, because nobody wants to tell someone we've misplaced your information or that sort of thing. And a business associate has to tell the covered entity. And we have to notify individuals of this potential breach. Now, if something happens with somebody's protected health information, I don't want you to assume it's a breach. Don't feel like you have to run around and say we breached, because there's a mechanism by which we can determine whether it's a breach or not. And sometimes you'll be surprised. It may not be a breach. But any time that you think we might have lost or inappropriately disclosed or inappropriately used someone's protected health information, you have to tell your supervisor or you have to call Rebecca. We need to know that, because we only have a limited number of days to tell people that we did, and we need to do our investigation and see if there's anything we can do to try to get the information back or find the information. So we need to do those things. So just some of the things that people have been fined for that I think resonate with some people. So the first one I'll tell you about is CVS. So CVS actually had a television reporter in the Midwest who didn't know what to do a story on, do what they call dumpster diving, which I think might be a sport for some people. But I always picture him in one of those one-piece suits with a hood and a zipper, so that he didn't get dirty or anything, maybe with some gloves on or something. But anyways, he dove. I hope not literally dove, but he went into, maybe he did. He went into a dumpster behind a CVS in the Midwest, and guess what he found? He found pill bottles, people's name, date of birth, and the psychotropic drug that they're on. And he did a huge expose on that. And CVS was horrified, as you can imagine, said that is not our policy. It's our policy to incinerate those little plastic bottles. This is an anomaly. This is not something that we do. They sent letters to every one of their stores across the United States and said, you are not allowed to do this. This is our policy. This is how you destroy pill bottles. The Reporter, 5 months later, got bored, I guess, didn't know what to do a story on. Maybe he cleaned his one-piece suit, maybe he didn't, I don't know, but he dove back into the same dumpster. And what do you think he found? Pill bottles. So CVS actually paid $1.2 million in a penalty for that. I often joke that, Rite Aid, there was no real fanfare. Rite Aid paid $1 million, probably said, okay, we'll clean up our dumpsters, don't look in them or something like that. But both of them for improperly disposing of information properly. Goes back to what I said about shred bins. We cannot destroy things in a haphazard way. We can't do that. Mass General, $1 million because an employee had a bag. Inside the bag was HIV information, and for any of you who have ridden a subway in New York City, you know how that works. You're not really paying attention sometimes to where the stops are. You're reading your book, you've got your headphones on, whatever you're doing, and then all of a sudden you realize that's your stop. The doors open and you fly out like Superman. Well, this person left the bag on the seat, and it was never recovered. And Mass General had had some issues with OCR before. They paid $1 million for that. Did that person intend to lose that? Absolutely not. There's no intent here. It's just people being sloppy because we get distracted. Last year, a home care provider. This will resonate with some people. Some of you are going to provide services on the road, which means you're going to be bringing stuff around. You may have things that need to be signed. You may have things that you have to go over with the person. So a home care provider does her visits, and then she goes home, and she sets the records. She doesn't leave them in her car. Never leave information in your car. We've had people who have had protected health information stolen out of their car in their driveway at night. So you have to, if you're running to Dunkin' Donuts, as annoying as this sounds, you need to make sure it's locked in your trunk if you don't bring it in. Because people see an attractive bag in the back or something that looks like a laptop, they will break into your car for it. So she brings the records in her house, which is the right thing to do. She leaves them on the kitchen table, and she goes get her children ready because her estranged husband is coming over to pick up the children. He comes over, he sees the records on the kitchen table, he rifles through them because he understands HIPAA, and then he turns her in for a HIPAA violation. Whole big investigation ensues. Her company, the home care company, is fined $275,000 for not giving her appropriate training on what to do with the records when she's at home. And they say, I can't believe you're fining us for this because he's a bad guy. Give us a break, right? This is something that would normally happen. But in all honesty, you can kind of see why they might be estranged, but it takes two to tango, and we don't know the story behind that. But you can see, why they might not be married anymore. So they are, there you have a situation where someone tries to secure the records, but they don't take it as far as they need to. So you have to, when you have records on the road, you have to secure them, not just from the people who might steal them, that's important too, but also they shouldn't be available to people in your house. Nobody should be viewing them but you. The penalties can be severe. I mentioned the million and the 1.2 million. The home care provider, I think, was 275,000. It's big numbers. It can add up, and it adds up more if we continually make the same mistake. So they'll give you the benefit of the doubt early on, but if you keep having to come in front of them doing the same thing wrong every time, they start to get frustrated, and they start to think that you're not correcting things fast enough. And we don't want to be that way. So we try to learn from our mistakes, we try to know when mistakes happen, and we try to not have this situation ever occur. But we are required to notify them of our breaches. We have to actually give them a report. And if it's over 500 people, we have to tell them immediately, and we actually have to go to the press and tell them about it. If it's under 500 people, then we tell them once a year. So it's very, very important that we try not to do this. So I mentioned lost laptops, thumb drives, stolen from the car. Once you are not employed here anymore, you have no reason to access any protected health information, including finding out how people are doing. And I know that's really hard because you may become close to people who are in service here, but technically once you leave, we can't really disclose any protected health information to you, nor should you be disclosing it to people who have left the agency. I mentioned not looking at, records that, out of curiosity that you don't have a reason to look at. Email, you have to be very careful with email. Email's a situation where you got to check that address. You got to make sure it's right. And I mentioned if it's got protected health information, learn how to encrypt, because it has to be encrypted when it goes. Shredding and social media. You got to be very, very careful with social media. And for a number of reasons, and we'll talk more about that, but obviously I'm aging as we speak at the agency. I've been working, with the agency for a long time. But, prior to social media, I would have said that we were a cautious society. I think, when I was a kid, there was actually a debate as to whether the names of children should be on the back of sports jerseys, because then, people would try to lure them in their car and they would know their name. And, now we put up our kids all the time on Facebook. You all have friends who put up anything on Facebook or Instagram. People put up, pictures of their surgical incision or their husband's surgical incision. It's crazy what we're willing to put up. And we've got to be very, very mindful of those things, because if we accidentally put protected health information up, that is a breach. So we got to be very, very careful with that. There's very specific rules for HIV here in New York under 27F of the Public Health Law. It involves any HIV information. So all of this information is very specially protected. So if there's HIV information in the middle of a record, we really need to be aware of that, and we've got to treat it very, very sensitively. That even includes a negative test. So the fact that I received the test, the HIV test, is enough to be protected under these special laws, even if it was negative. So we, do not just give out HIV information with a general consent or an authorization that doesn't check it specifically. There has to be a special court order for it. So if you ever run into these situations, you absolutely go to your supervisor so that we handle them appropriately. This has been a tough year for HIV. Aetna, you might have read about this, actually mailed out 12,000 notices with a window envelope. And in the window envelope, it actually had the person's name and address, but you could also see that what they were sending was a benefit change regarding HIV information or HIV prescriptions. So now you could attach the person's name with the fact that they were taking an HIV-related drug. And there were lawsuits in multiple states, and OCR got involved, and many attorney generals got involved, and it was very, very costly for Aetna. Again, did anyone mean to do this? Absolutely not. It's just an innocent mistake, but it's the things we need to think about when we're handling protected health information. And then I would say in the past year, this has been a major issue. Do not click on the link. If people send you an email and say they want to update your information, just click on this link, don't do it. Don't do it. They are using those fake emails to try to get into either your home computer if you're at home or into our system here. They have the ability to freeze records. They have the ability to download records once they're in. They often offer a ransom. There's all kinds of crazy things that ensue from that. Be very, very careful when you're clicking on things. You got to know that that email is legitimate. And I mentioned social media. You got to be very, very careful with social media. We had one client, someone took a picture of their desk. It had records on it. They put up the picture. It was a busy desk. Look how freaking busy I am. That's very funny. Nobody meant any harm by it. But when you blew up the picture, you could see the people's health information. That had 36 likes already. That is a breach. All right, that is a breach. If you put up a description of something that happened in the house a particular day, and you throw that up on Facebook, and everyone knows where you work, and some people know enough about the people in your house to know who you're talking about, that's enough to be a concern. So you gotta be careful anytime that you're putting things up on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or any of those types of things, because it is extremely important that it not be protected health information. There is nothing private. I don't care what security you have on it, there is nothing private. We all know that. We saw Facebook. We all still use those things, but we know they're not private. You have to be very, very careful because it can be innocent and sometimes it's a disaster. I mentioned email. it has to be encrypted. It should be the minimum amount of information in there. If you don't need to include information about other individuals, don't. You should never, ever, ever send lifetime assistance information to your home email account. Your Gmail, your Hotmail account, we don't know if they're secure. We don't know if your home computer is secure. My home computer is probably not that secure. My kids use it. Who knows what they're clicking on? I think we have McAfee. I think it's running, but I don't know if it is. So never send information to your home email. Be careful with the use of a personal phone. Pictures are great. Sometimes we ask you to take pictures, but we have policies about the destruction of those. They should not go up on social media, and encryption is very, very important. Do you have to reply to all? Does everyone need to know the PHI? Beware of that group emails. Check what's at the bottom of the chain. I had this once. People are talking about an individual we serve in email, and it wasn't here, but then somebody says, want to go to lunch. Wants to go to lunch? Okay. Want to go to Panera? I love Panera. The soup's fantastic. I love the bread. Then all of a sudden they invite Judy. And Judy, who used to work at the agency and hasn't been there for 4 months, and Judy's very nice and everybody misses Judy, then Judy gets copied on the email. Now everyone's going to lunch, including Judy, but Judy has all the protected health information under it. And all of a sudden, that's a breach. So you got to be very, very careful. Writing for publication, should that be in writing? I think sometimes we put too much in a text, we put too much in email. If there's a serious problem that you encounter, call someone. All right, call someone. You don't have to always send emails to discuss issues. We have a number of HIPAA policies and procedures. Obviously, they're available to you. You can take a look at them. If you have questions about them, please ask. It's very complex. And mobile devices. If you use your mobile device for work, then we may ask you to sign a statement talking about how it can be used. There's no pictures unless they're required for your job. We require a certain amount of security. We don't want you sharing it, obviously, if it has confidential information on it. If it's stolen, you have to tell us because it has our information on it. You will agree, if you're using it for work business, that if you lose it, we can wipe it clean, all right, because obviously it has PHI. It can be monitored if it's connected to our network. And obviously, if we think there's something going on or we need information on your phone, we do reserve the right to look at it. That doesn't mean we do it all the time. IT is very busy. They have other things to do. But we do reserve that right. So what I would say to you is keep these things in mind. We ask you to maintain a very high ethical standard here. So when you're making a decision here at the agency, you should be asking yourself, okay, is what I'm doing legal? But legal is not always the standard, right? We want a higher bar than legal. Legal keeps you from wearing orange, keeps you out of jail. We want a higher standard than that. Is it ethical? Do I feel good about what I'm doing? Does it comply with organization policy? If what I'm doing at work or what my colleagues are doing at work came out and ended up on the news, would I be embarrassed? Would I be embarrassed if my mom found out? If any of those things are true and you would be embarrassed, you need to tell someone, because those are the things we need to know about to be a better agency. It's extraordinarily important that you report, that if you have any concern, anything that's keeping you up at night, anything that's making you go home and say, I'm not sure about this job that I took, any of those types of things, go to your supervisor, go to Rebecca, go to someone in management. We are here to help. We're here to answer your questions. We're here to get things right. And as an agency, we take this extremely, extremely seriously because we want to be known as the best of the best. That's what we're looking for. We're not just looking for legal or compliant or, yeah, they're pretty good. We want to be as good as we can be. And that takes all of you, every person watching this video, every person who still works at the agency, for us to do things right. Obviously, if any questions come up, you can absolutely ask them. You should never be afraid of that. You should be very proud that you took this job. It's a wonderful agency. It changes people's lives, and not many jobs do that. So please enjoy your time at Lifetime Assistance. Thanks for listening, and you'll be getting refresher training eventually. Thank you.